The video you are about to watch is from an old woodworking magazine that I published during the years of 2003 to approximately 2006. This was a very unique magazine. It was purely video content and it was distributed on DVDs. The magazine ran for approximately 3.5 years, and then due to financial concerns, we simply had to terminate the magazine. We moved on to other things over the last roughly 15 years. However, there has been a request to resurrect this content, so I've gone through the trouble to get the equipment, the products, everything I needed in order to bring this content back to life to share with everyone. Here on this YouTube channel, we'll be putting up approximately 100 to 120 of the original stories that appeared in that magazine. The magazine was called Woodworking at Home Magazine, and it was truly one of a kind in the world. I really hope you enjoy these videos, and please tell your friends about them.
Hello, I'm Dave Reilly, and welcome to What a Relief. This is the third section of this series on carving in iris. So for starts, I think we could do a little bit of review to what we've covered so far. We started with getting the pattern glued onto the block of wood. Then we discussed the methods of reducing the background, either with a router or drill or by the hand gouge. And then we continued on and talked about trimming the edge of your carving down to the line and starting on the rough modeling. So at that point, we'll pick up from there and we'll continue now with the trimming to the line, some of the more fine points of that, and then go on to the modeling and then the finished work. Now when you get into this part of the carving, light becomes a much more important factor. I have this little light here now that I can move around, just mounts on the bench. It's going to be very helpful for me to see the detail, the surface texture, and all the shadows involved in the carving. Don't ever underestimate the use of good, strong lighting. Now reviewing a little bit the trimming to size, bringing it down to a line. As I mentioned before, you go straight down, keep it nice and vertical, even if you're going to be doing any undercutting or modeling in the future. Now is the time to define very sharply the shape of each element in the carving. Now be careful about this. This is one place that people have some trouble. Don't go down too deeply into the wood. If you do, you're going to have a lot of trouble cleaning all of that out and getting these little surfaces sharp and well defined as you work down in. So this is important. Again, we're not being terribly concerned about the surface of the background. Inevitably, you're going to put some nicks or scratches or little imperfections in the bottom of the carving here in the background. Those, though, all will come out when you do the very final. After you've done all of the final detail work, those will all come out. So it's just be patient, keep at it. I'm using a straight chisel here because the curve is so slight. And then I can come with a deeper tool just to clean that final area out. You notice I have the light on. It does help so that you see the surface that you are producing. Now that area in here, it's just a matter of starting to cut away your pattern. It'll be removed. Now here's where you're going to have a bit of problem perhaps, trying to remember what part goes over and what part goes under. Now what I've done here is, you can see, I've taken a marking pen and I've marked the areas where it goes under the other component of the design. It's pretty easy to get yourself out of track here and end up with two pieces going under where one should have gone over and the other gone under. And to do that, it's a time you can use your mallet and it's just a stop cut to define where that piece is going to go. And then you just start the cutting down. This may take a while because sometimes it's a bit difficult to know exactly how deep you're going to go immediately. You may go down and then you may come back to determine how deep you're going to have to go again, and just keep working your way down. There's no hurry. It takes a bit of patience, but the results, of course, will be much more satisfying than if you go down too deeply at first. Grain here is always going to be a problem. Now this piece of hard maple is a bit of a challenge. On this particular piece, the grain is a bit twisty. So when you start making a cut, check to see how the grain is going. If it's not going right, stop immediately. You don't want to start chipping out and breaking out areas. And this is the time also to start thinking about how you're going to, the twist and the flow of each piece. You can do this roughly. As you can see, for convenience, I'm using one carving with the various different steps worked out on it. It just makes it a little bit easier to show, and then you can see the transition from one piece to the next. Now, I have been able to clean down now right to my line in some of these elements right in here. On the dividing between these two areas in here, a knife becomes very handy to have. You can make some very nice, long, straight stop cuts in areas like this. It keeps the flow going nicely, rather than trying to use a gouge to chop and nibble down. The original work is done with a gouge because you have to go rather deeply, and this is fairly hard wood. But when you get down to the final, using a knife just to clean some of these little areas out, such as in here, it works really very well. Now there's one thing that I want you to notice on this carving. There are different layers and different levels for each element. Now in this area in here, there's actually 3 different layers. This layer in here lays down tight on the background, and it goes underneath this layer here. This layer here goes underneath this layer, so we now have 3 layers laying one on top of the other. That's something to notice. Also, and this is really very important, these leaves are not woven together as you would with a fabric, where they dip and turn and they keep going underneath each other. Here they're just laying on each other. So don't get into the situation where you come along and you dip down underneath, come back up sharply, and go level. This bottom one should lay pretty flat, except for this one area where it rises up over this bottom one. This bottom one will stay relatively flat all the way across. Otherwise, you're going to get a woven look, and the leaves on this iris in particular don't do that. They're actually laying just one on top of each other. All right, now what I'm going to do is, we've shown you all the rough working in, the rough shaping. I'm going to go into more detail on carving this particular leaf or petal. Now what it's going to be is, over here, this is the general shape that we're going to be doing. You can see the curves in it, how it's undercut in places here, to show that it's actually folded over itself. It's a little bit more of a technical, so I've waited and will get you started on this right now. The first thing we can do is we can outline this part of the petal with a V-tool. It's a quick way to form a stop cut. Now that I've clearly defined it, we can continue on with some of the deeper carving. You'll notice right in here, I have the pencil marks to show that this is going to be deeply undercut. This is where it's going to go down and go under. I also have here I want to pencil in the areas where it's slightly concave, and this gives this roundness to these elements in here. So as we talked about for the roughing in, going cross grain makes a lot of sense here. You don't have to worry too much about the way the grain fluctuates, and believe me, on this piece of wood, it certainly has been a challenge. The grain, and particularly at this end of the carving, undulates up and down and turns on me. So by going across grain, I can get some of this nice deep modeling early on. So now you can see how we are coming down in. This area here rolls over, so I can use a slightly deeper tool to get that area, to produce that area right in there. And the next step is these, again, as I've mentioned before, keep your pencil lines in. It's pretty easy to get yourself out of track without some form of a guide. Here's an example of the grain being most uncooperative this morning. I can switch to a little deeper. This is also a number 6, but a little narrower. And this allows me to get my work down in. Take my V. To keep this nice edge well defined. Again, it's a case of pick it up, put it down, pick it up, put it down. Don't feel you have to stay with one particular tool. I won't carry this to completion because of the time restraints, but I want you to see how the approach is as you get yourself started. Now here is a little more curve in here. We all have trouble sometimes trying to visualize how these flow is going to go. So here again, as I've said many times before, get out the modeling clay and actually model one in clay. In this case, the leaf originally, if you model it perfectly flat and then take it and fold it over as you would in its natural state, you'll see how the different layers form, how the curves develop, and so on. And that will save you an awful lot of time Here's where we cut under. We'll get a little bit more. Now I think you can see how the shape is beginning to develop. And it's just more to develop and intensify those curves. And then now you just continue to define all these shapes. Now this area in here, be careful, you're working on an edge. The grain can be a problem. I'll show you better from this side. What I'm going to do is I'm going to take a deep gouge, perhaps in the number 11 range, to form this little bead that works right around the front, which gives a little curvature to that top. Now again, I think you can see how this curve is beginning to develop. Take your time. If you see some carvers do this with 3 or 4 strokes with a tool, yes, they're accomplished, but this may be the 800th one they've carved, so they know exactly what they have to do. They've worked out all the details. But for us normal people, it takes a little time just to nibble your way down and be a little more tentative. And then you'll probably have much greater success. Again, here we. All right, now I think you can see how we have developed this curve here. We're starting to develop these curves as they go down in here deeply. I can open those up a little bit more for you. Let me accentuate one here just for display. There, I think perhaps you can see how this curve now is beginning to develop. If I move the light a little bit, this is where the value of the light is. Now you can begin to see how these curves are beginning to develop. You'll move the light around an awful lot so that you can see the texture. The final area in here is with either your V, you can come and undercut very slightly, because this piece here is clearly laying over the petal. It's not just laying on top. But we'll get to that in the next phase when we start and do our final detailing and final finishing. All right, now we're going to go on to the final detailing. Everything has been roughed in. Now we have to get the final surface and any little tiny details finished before we do the actual finishing of the project itself. Now there's one thing I want to point out is that when you're doing this cutting down for the final, not so much for the roughing in, you want to get these pieces nicely defined. Now, the approach is, logically, you chop down first and then come in underneath and clean out that chip. For the very final ones, I prefer to do it in the reverse order, or what appears to be the reverse order. What I do is I will come in and come up and get the background up to my the feature that I'm working with. Then I will come down from the top and cut those pieces away. Now what's happening here is, you see, I get a nice, clean, sharp edge right in here. Now, what's happening is, if you come down first, there's always the possibility, and it's a very real possibility, that you will cut down much too deeply, so that when you clean off the horizontal surface, you will end up with a sharp cut right here at the bottom. And I think that just looks very bad. The only time that you want that is when a feature is clearly to be above the bottom surface. Then that sharp cut defines it. But generally you don't want that. On the top surfaces, now is the time to get a nice smooth tooling, getting the curve you want. These can be somewhat flat. Now this one is a bit thick, so we can start and bring him down. Pay close attention to the grain. This is not the time you want to catch the grain and break a piece off, although that can be repaired, but it's pretty depressing. Now I'm using a very flat tool, a number tool. If you want a much more curvature, you can go to a deeper curve tool, and this will give a little roundness, a little motion to the work. But here is the time, sharp tools, and get a nice, smooth, consistent surface. Once you have all of that done, the final step is to decide what type of surface you do want for the finished carving. The philosophy in many areas is not to sand at all. This is entirely up to you. You can sand, you can leave it tooled. Both ways are perfectly good. Some of these detail areas in the corners, now they're going to be a real challenge. And there is a tool that can be used for that. Now this type of tool, it's really a little file. They're referred to in tool catalogs as a die sinker's riffler file, and they come in all different types and shapes. I prefer this. This is a nice general size. This is a number 2 cut, which is relatively coarse. I also have here a number 0, which is quite fine. You don't have to be so elegant as to put fancy handles on them, however. But they're wonderful for getting into tiny little corners. As an example, here you can see I've left just some little bits of fluff that has been left over, going in with these right into the corner. They're fine enough that they're not going to leave filing marks, and yet you can get this nice detail in all of these little corners. Down in here, you can get down inside and clean them up. Now what I've done on one of them, I've taken one and I've actually ground off all the file teeth, so I have actually this very sharp tool, and this is nice. This allows me just to sneak down in and peel off just a little hair for that final detailing. If you choose to sand, you can use obviously just a piece of rolled up sandpaper. The grit is of your choice as to the texture you want, and just start the sanding. Now some people will prefer to leave it as a tool surface. That's fine. There is no right and there is no wrong. It is purely up to your choice as to what you want to do. And now you just start again. Start at one end and work to the other and work your way all the way through it. Many times I prefer to leave the figure itself sanded, In this case, you would expect these leaves to be nice and smooth, and then leave the background deeply textured. It gives a rather nice contrast. But again, this is entirely up to you. I'm not going to suggest to you what you should do or what is right or what is wrong. You do it to please yourself. You really cannot go wrong. So now looking at this particular detail in here, let's just take it from the beginning to completion. Using the small riffler file, I can do any little bit of shaping that's necessary. I can get down in this corner, do all the cleaning out, and then I can use a burnishing stick. And a burnishing stick is simply a hardwood dowel shaped to whatever shape seems to be appropriate, and you just start to rub and burnish that particular area in. And you can use this on a lot of surfaces. It'll soften edges without obliterating any of the detail, and it leaves a very nice polished look to the carving. Now, starting on the final step here is on the background itself. We make a little choice here as to how coarse or how heavily tooled you want your background now. I'm going to use just two examples. Again, this is entirely up to you, whatever your taste dictate. Here I'm using a number 6 gouge to give a fairly deep surface. And the important thing is not to have it mechanical, but do have it consistent and regular. These little chips coming out. As you can see now, this nicely mottled background. This is where a light coming in from the edge is absolutely essential. You simply will not be able to see this without it. Now, the other approach is making it rather smooth. And now here, I'm using a number 2 gouge, very flat. It's the one step above a perfectly flat tool. And you see the texture it's getting here. Again, you want to be nice and consistent. So really, the choice is yours. Now, the important thing is, if possible, try to do this backgrounding pretty much during the same session, or certainly close to the same period of time. If you don't, certain areas you will not have the consistency you will have throughout the entire carving. Some areas will have it a little deeper, the texture will be different, the spacing of each cut will be different. But if you can manage to do all of this in one setting, you'll have a nice, consistent background. All right, now just to example of the importance of having good light, let me turn this light off, and you see you lose all of your detail. But now you can see it, and sometimes you think you have a good surface, you put the light down like this, and it's heartbreaking when you see how rough your surface is. So light is very, very important. So now that completes the actual carving of our project. I hope you've enjoyed it. The last step is the surface finish that you're going to put on it. And in one word, we can describe the finish: anything. Any type of finish you want. You can use wax, you can use lacquer, you can use tung oil, anything that you find appropriate. Possibly house paint applied with a 2-inch brush may not be the best way to go, but then again, that's entirely up to you. So that's it for this, and if you have done all the things that we have talked about and had some success, you will end up with this finished piece. I hope you've enjoyed it. I'm Dave Reilly for Woodworking at Home. Thank you.
I sincerely hope you enjoyed watching this video. If you truly enjoyed it, Please help us share this information with the rest of the communities. Please hit the subscribe button, give us a big thumbs up, and be sure to tell your friends about this channel. Thanks again for watching.